Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 15th of May, 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, a little while ago, there was some talk of impending hosepipe ban, but clearly that appears unlikely with a massive change of weather in Plymouth and many other places. So summer over the weekend, and today we're back to winter and torrential rain. Good news for gardeners.
Absolutely right. We'll get straight in with Syria. Now, last week we mentioned reports that US and UK troops are massing on the Jordanian side of the Syrian border, and the Ministry of Defence, if you remember, absolutely categorically denied that that was the case to me on the telephone. Well, more reports seem to be coming out. Breaking is the headline. US British forces enter southern Syria with rebels. And this report saying that US and British forces entered southern Syria yesterday afternoon while travelling through the Tanf border crossing in the Homs Governorate. And that's according to the Smart News Agency. They're saying that based on that report, they're saying 150 US and British military personnel, entered Syria alongside the Free Syrian Army. They were filmed travelling across the border, and the area that they've moved into is 90 kilometres east of Palmyra, near Deir ez-Zor, and they are attempting to support the tame terrorists in that area. And Reuters then has said that in response, perhaps, that the Syrian army is sending reinforcements towards the border with Iraq and Jordan. It says, just as US-backed rebels are consolidating control in the area. So that seems to be some kind of validation of the allegations that there is activity going on in the area, at least. And I think the Ministry of Defence has some questions to answer here, because the denial to me was absolutely categoric.
I think there's lots of questions to be answered, Mike, because, of course, we've sort of been told on one hand that the Prime Minister or secret members of the government can commit British Special Forces. That has happened before, and the usual reply is, well, this is Special Forces deployments and we don't talk about that. Now what we're beginning to see is that the British military are being deployed overseas with no debate in Westminster, presumably the decision made behind closed doors with who? Prime Minister, Mr. Fallon. And then, of course, when the reality leaks out and questions are asked, the Ministry of Defence media team simply lie to cover up what's actually happening. So there should be an outcry here by not only the public, but of course by prospective parliamentary candidates. Who is now running the country? Is it a democracy at all, or is it simply now a conservative police state?
For the next 4 weeks at least, I guess it is
conservative police state.
Yes. Okay, so here we go. Some more news from Syria, and this is the continuing evacuation of armed terrorists, shall we call them. 2,000 of them, 2,000 gunmen, as this headline is saying it, and family members being evacuated from eastern Damascus. This is according to local sources. The sources are reporting that the first phase of the evacuation has ended. 2,289 people, including 1,058 gunmen, evacuated from this part of Damascus. And of course, this is part of the agreement to move armed insurgents from areas that are government held or close to government held areas, and they are being sent over to Idlib, where they can meet up with their friends. And moving on to Yemen then, as if Yemen hasn't got enough to deal with famine and war, it now looks like they have a cholera outbreak on their hands as well. So the authorities in Sana'a have declared a state of emergency, according to the Daily Star here, over an outbreak of cholera that has spread throughout Sana'a. And they're saying that 115 people have been killed by this so far, 8,500 people ill, and that's just in the course of last week. So the International Committee of the Red Cross have said that have given those statistics, and I think it's about time that this conflict started to get some proper traction in the mainstream media with some proper questions being asked.
It would be nice. And of course, Saudi Arabia in the background, Mike, and presumably that's too friendly with the British government, so we don't want to upset anyone. So BBC, for example, simply doesn't report.
Yeah.
But we can come in on this angle. It's interesting, we're back on the theme of war, and more war as we report politics in Britain. But couldn't resist this one. The Washington Post says that the US is shifting forces into Eastern Europe to monitor large Russian military exercises. This was actually the comment from Defence Secretary Jim Mattis. We will deploy whatever capability is necessary. He was speaking during a visit to Lithuania. We will talk to the leaders of each of the NATO nations and we'll work this out in Brussels. Now, I thought that was a particularly interesting statement because is he really talking NATO or is he talking the EU unified military by saying that they're going to be discussing this in Brussels?
Well, he's talking both because this is what I was saying on Friday. The NATO heads of state meeting is taking place in Brussels in a couple of weeks' time. And I thought it was very interesting that it was being held in Brussels because I believe that is exactly related to the EU military unification project.
Which is the very topic that Theresa May and the whole of the Conservatives don't want to mention during the election. But I'll just add for that previous slide that of course the Americans are pointing a finger at the Russians holding a large-scale military exercise inside Russia. But the Americans saying, well, of course, this is aggression really, and we're only there to monitor it. The US and the NATO build-up along the eastern border of Russia is only there to protect sovereignty. Of course, that's not aggressive. It's becoming very difficult to understand what the real world is and what is this increasingly bizarre pantomime that's being played out through the European Union and NATO. Right, well, where can we go from that? We better come to elections. And I saw this and I winced because May is giving all workers new rights to time off. Now, this can't be some cheap electioneering, or can it? Yes, it is. Well, of course, it must be. She is so desperate that as other newspapers picked up, she's having to try and steal ideas from the other parties in order to cover up what the Conservatives are really about, which is building a police state. So I'm going to say, well, the prize goes to the Mirror here because they went straight for the jugular and said Theresa May, no defender of workers' rights, and you've only got to look at her track record. So we could argue about the Mirror versus the Times or the Telegraph, but at the end of the day, this journalist went straight to the heart of the matter and said, well, this, of course, is just crass electioneering.
Are those some kind of bondage chains that she's
wearing?
I
did actually tweet this picture out earlier this morning, Mike, and suggested that this was blue rinse Conservative bondage equipment. These are the chains of office, which apparently she thoroughly enjoys wearing.
Right. Okay.
We better end on that bit.
Yeah.
And let's have a look at the quality of the Tory party. Well, I found this really quite astonishing, but it's a gentleman called James Heppey. He's the Conservative parliamentary candidate in Wells in Somerset. He did a talk to teenage schoolgirls at Millfield School, and when one of the girls, who is Scottish, said that she was pro the SNP and a breakup of the union, as she was perfectly entitled to say, he said, why don't you F off back to Scotland? This isn't a made-up story. There are some spelling mistakes in it. I'm sorry that I should have labelled this for the Daily Mail, the Daily Mail story, so I encourage you to go and read it. But basically, this is what he said. He's apologised, but I think it absolutely shows the quality of a Tory candidate. Can he really be allowed to stand as a parliamentary candidate having done this? It was in his mind. He did it with intent. What sort of man is this?
Couldn't comment.
And we'll bring in this one because we had quite an interesting weekend with some very good information coming in, but a suggestion that the election had been called so quickly because the Tories are really now started to panic about the amount of information coming to the surface around the Conservative Party and child abuse. We know that cross-party MPs are now actually looking, they're asking questions again around accusations of abuse by members of Parliament and the Westminster establishment. We know that Chief Constable of Wiltshire, Mike Veal, under huge pressure from government sources to close down his investigation into Ted Heath. And we've also got the testimony of John Wedger, the Metropolitan Police whistleblower, who also says that there is a lot of fractiousness and fear inside Westminster as people, and particularly the Conservatives, panicking about the truth coming out about the child abuse. Well, if we just add to that slide, this little section, not only have we got the children, there's also the election fraud around Tories, although of course this has been gently swept under the carpet with the CPS at the moment. We've also got the fraudulent offshore companies and accounts, and as we've already intimated, we've got the continuing EU military unification. So I found this quite interesting, Mike, that a number of different sources are saying, yes, these elections have been called at very, very short notice because the Tories, I think, realise that if they can't get a controlling majority, and that is a big majority that can crush any form of debate in Westminster, the truth about what their party really stands for is going to come to the surface. So interesting times. And this little tweet caught my eye this morning, which I was happy to retweet, but it's from Councillor Mike Sparling, Labour, in Plymouth, and he says, Johnny Mercer, parliamentary Conservative, was in Parliament less than 2 years. His expense claims on top of his salary, £194,988.63. So this is really the state of it. This is Johnny Mercer, who absolutely has refused to talk about the reality of defence and the fact that his Conservative Party is still pushing the UK military into this unified EU structure. He won't talk about that, but he's very happy to take the money. And if you'd like to see the source for this information, it's from the Parliamentary Overseeing Body, and you can see quite a lot of detail on what that money consisted of. So once again, we've got another look into the quality of the Tory MPs. They're very happy to take the money, but they don't want to do the job as MPs.
What's next?
Well, we'll end it off by saying that if anybody would like to take this man to task, he has been kind enough to put out the dates and locations of his public meetings during the election campaign. So anybody who's in the Plymouth or Devon area, you might like to pop along and ask him key questions, which could be EU military unification, or it could be the undermining of Britain's military forces, or it could be child abuse, or of course these fraudulent Conservative companies. Be very interesting to see the responses.
Okay. Across the in Europe, it's the EU Foreign Affairs Council meeting today. There's the delightful Federica Mogherini on screen. She, of course, President of the Council and the EU's so-called High Representative for Foreign Affairs, Foreign Minister, in other words. And so what are they talking about? Well, they're talking about EU global strategy on security and defence. So they say that the Council will take stock of the implementation of the EU global strategy in the areas of security and defence, in particular on civilian aspects. Defence ministers will also have a discussion on the topic of the Foreign Affairs Council Defence on the 18th of May. They're also talking about EU-African relations, and particularly the Horn of Africa, Somalia and so on. They are talking about, I think they're going to talk a little bit about cyber defence, but we'll talk about that in a second in more detail. Now, during his doorstep comments, Boris Johnson was asked about EU military unification, and particularly about the launch of a new EU military headquarters. We'll come on to the rest of it in a second. In the first instance, let's have a look and see what he had to say.
military headquarters for training missions?
Well, there's a discussion still going on about some of the language of that, but I want to stress on that. You know, the UK, as I said a year or so ago, you know, when I first got out here, we understand the vital importance of us all as European countries working together to strengthen our defences. We all want to see our European friends and partners spending more on defence, and that's good. If they can get up to the 2%, that's terrific. We really want to encourage that as fast as possible. If they want to come together, as you suggest, with other arrangements, then, you know, we're not going to stand in their way. We're just working on some of the language to make sure that we get it totally right.
So we're going to work on the language, Brian, to make sure we get it totally right. We're not going to stand on their way, but we're going to cooperate as much as we can.
Well, we've got to get the language right, because if they don't get the language right, the public in UK will understand that there is no such thing as Brexit. Britain's military is being completely subsumed within this EU unified structure. The military headquarters, the EU military headquarters, already set up in numerous locations, including St Morgan in Cornwall, Northwood in London, and in Europe itself, of course. And those structures we know can be turned on within 24 hours. So Brexit, complete and utter lie, and the military is the key to understanding this.
Well, I just got one quick quote here from The Guardian. It says, EU diplomatic sources were quoted as saying the British government was anxious not to be wrong-footed on the issue ahead of the general election on June the 8th, dominated by Brexit. So
they're panicking.
They are panicking to keep the lid on this until June the 8th. Now, last week, David Ellis said that this was the most important topic with regard to this election. If you want to see the Conservatives blown up from the inside, perhaps is the best, metaphorically speaking, absolutely, bring this issue to every public meeting you possibly can, because they have no answer to it, and it puts the lie on Brexit. We've got to get this out to a broader audience.
Yeah, and this, of course, is why local Conservative MPs Gary Streeter, Oliver Colville and Johnny Mercer simply would not discuss the demise of Britain's armed forces. Their response was an aggressive personal attack. They wouldn't respond to the questions put to them.
Boris did mention that they would have a few words amongst themselves about cyber security, and of course the big news over the weekend was the so-called WannaCry ransomware, the software that people are accidentally installing on their computers, which is encrypting their hard disks and then saying, well, if you send us some Bitcoin, we'll send you the keys to unencrypt it again. Well, it was initially stopped. It's no longer being stopped because it's evolving, apparently. People are rewriting it and re-releasing it out to the wild, and people are continuing to accidentally install it on their computers. What was the source of this, Brian? Well, of course, the National Security Agency is derived from their hacks and their software, which has appeared via WikiLeaks. We'll come onto that in a second. Now, I just want to put a little bit of context on this, if we can, a bit of perspective. The original target for the WannaCry ransomware was the National Health Service, still using Windows XP computers. Haven't been supported from Microsoft for a few years now, but that's okay. They're using it. I guess the NHS just doesn't have enough money to bring systems up to date. But back in November, Philip Hammond announced that Britain will boost its cybersecurity defences with a £1.9 billion investment. So £1.9 billion, we must now keep up with the scale and pace of the threats we face, he said back in November. So $2.32 billion investment, and that was going to create a new national cybersecurity strategy, which was going to provide funding to develop automatic defences to help protect British businesses and citizens online. So they've done a good job there, Brian.
Well, not really.
Not really. He also said our new strategy will allow us to take even greater steps to defend ourselves in cyberspace and to strike back when we're attacked. So that's how successful they've been so far. Let's see what this man had to say, Lord Kerslake. I apologise, that's the wrong quote on there. So we'll just read out what he did say. He told BBC Westminster Hour, "I suspect the defence and security systems are pretty well protected, but beyond that, I think pretty much every government department is at risk here. The sums involved in protecting against cyber attacks are pretty eye-watering, but I think we're going to have to look at the situation pretty closely. The key issues are about investment, but also the discipline of users of the systems. Often these software malwares use users of the systems against themselves." Well, that's true, but of course, what is he actually doing here? Absolutely nothing, it appears, because they've been talking about this for so long now, and yet nothing seems to have moved forward.
Well, that statement on screen sort of helps us here, Mike, doesn't it? Because they have been bringing together all sorts of people who they claim are the people that are going to help us, protect us, help drive the NHS. And at the end of the day, we're constantly seeing things getting worse.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And let's go back a few months again. This is the NATO comments on cyber defence, because they've been talking about this for months now. The number of attempts to hack NATO apparently has increased by 60%. So NATO has been talking about this, foreign ministers have been talking about this, defence ministers have been talking about this, and Philip Hammond has been talking about this, and yet nothing seems to have been done. So let's remember what Stoltenberg said a few months ago. According to our latest evaluations, that there was a monthly average of 500 threatening cyber attacks last year against NATO infrastructure that required intensive intervention from our experts. So the key point that I want to make here is the establishment, the governments, NATO, everybody has been talking about this for a very long time. They've been ramping this story up in the press for over a year now, that cybersecurity is the biggest threat. And of course, when we actually remind ourselves of what the source of this latest attack is, it is the National Security Agency and Vault 7 here, the WikiLeaks, the special site that WikiLeaks set up to cover this stuff and to highlight these tools that the NSA has been using. And they have just released a new batch of leaks called After Midnight and Assassin. These have come from the Central Intelligence Agency. They're both programs designed to monitor and report on infected remote host computers, again running Windows, and to execute whatever it was that the CIA wanted in terms of a payload. So the source of this is government, in a sense, well, security services. And security services, how has this stuff arrived in the wild? Has it been leaked to WikiLeaks? Is WikiLeaks being used as a government tool? Because what they're intending to do here is to produce a problem which they can then provide a solution for later on.
Yeah. I found it interesting that in the newspaper reports, Mike, we don't get comment on the hacking from GCHQ, who we might expect to be closely monitoring and countering at least some of these attacks. We get an amateur hacker. I can't remember his name, but there was a picture of a young man, and he apparently saved the NHS over the weekend by coming up with some backdoor way of stopping the virus. So we paid GCHQ, I think it was an additional £2 billion in cybersecurity. You're talking about more money. And then when the attack comes in, we've got some amateur computer expert, in inverted commas, who saves the nation. Wouldn't it be better to employ him on £200,000 a year?
Yes.
Okay. And while you were giving that report, I was just catching up on what they're saying at the moment. So Mainstream is saying that the NHS is safe, although there's been sort of additional spikes. But we're cancelling operations as a result of hacking. How does that work? Does that mean that the hacking affects what takes place in an operating theatre, or does it just mean they don't know what operations they got scheduled?
It means they don't know what operations they've got scheduled.
So the NHS has no backup systems at all?
No. Despite
a budget of 110 billion?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, AV8. This weekend? This
weekend, so rapidly approaching. I know the ticket sales have gone extremely well. There's no more tickets for the weekend with accommodation at the hotel, but you can still get day tickets if you go online. numbers are high and increasing. I think it's going to be a really excellent event. And of course, the timing is really good because we've got a very turbulent situation in the country with the elections apart from anything else. So if you've never been to an AV8 before, very sociable idea is to learn and enjoy from the various talks and the speakers, but also be able to mix and make friends with other people there.
Before we move on from that, we should mention that as a result, since we will be travelling backwards to and from the event, there'll be no news from the UK column on Friday this week. That's the 19th, and Monday, which is the 22nd. So no news on Friday or Monday. We'll obviously have news the rest of this week, but we will come back the following Tuesday. Can I just remind everybody that I'm really keen for people to share this YouTube video. This is a snippet from last Wednesday's news, I think. Tim Farron's comments making what I'm saying, the trafficking of Syrian unaccompanied children an election issue. Please help to make that an election issue, since he's demanding a further 50,000 unaccompanied children be brought to this country in the full knowledge that many of those will disappear out the other side of the care system to a life of sexual
abuse and trafficking.
Perhaps.
Yeah. He does it in. I find Mr. Farron quite remarkable because, of course, he's joint chair of the all-party Christian group in Westminster, along with local Tory MP to be Gary Streeter. What will they do when they're given the evidence as to what's happening with these children? Nothing. They simply run away. It's remarkable.
Somebody in the chat box asking about AV8. Is Graham Downing speaking? Yes, he is. He's got 2 talks. I believe they're both on the Saturday night. But if you go to alternativeview.co.uk, you can probably see the schedule there.
Yeah, and of course you do get the opportunity to meet the speakers because people are freely mixing. So if you've never had the opportunity to talk to Graham Downing before, you may well get it at the event.
Okay, now let's move on to this. The Belt and Road Forum was taking place. Belt and Road Initiative Forum was taking place over the weekend, and today's the last day. President Xi gave his keynote speech yesterday, and he was talking about the next steps that need to be taken to make sure that the 100 countries that are taking part so far in this can benefit further from it. He's talking about $950 billion in investments, over 900 projects, another $115 billion in new commitments from that forum. And he was highlighting how difficult it is to coordinate project design. He's talking about economic development, planning, industrial mobilization among the participating countries. And very interesting point here, he's talking about joint financing through national creditory systems. And of course, this is exactly what we've been talking about for a long time with using the Bradbury Pound as the sort of leader for that. He said, industries are the foundation of economy. We should deepen industrial cooperation so that industrial development plans of different countries will complement and reinforce each other. Focus should be put on launching major projects, and we should strengthen international cooperation on production capacity and equipment manufacturing, and seize new development opportunities presented by the new industrial revolution to foster new businesses and maintain dynamic growth. So it was a positive message being given, on the basis of national cooperation rather than globalization in the sense of Western globalization. Now, who else was there? Well, Philip Hammond was there. Here's his tweet saying that he was there, and apparently he is in the middle of that group there. I'm sure you can see him there, Brian.
Okay.
Yeah. So connectivity, cooperation are his top priorities. He said it was an honor to speak there. He commended President Xi for his excellent speech in the morning and for setting the whole thing in motion. Groundbreaking. He used all the positive language. And he said that China's ability to drive phenomenal economic development is well proven. Since 1980, the Chinese economy has grown over 2,500%. This year it's expected to account for a quarter of global economic growth, And of course, the reason economic growth matters is because of how it transforms people's lives. So he's bringing a British perspective to this. I don't think his perspective is quite what the event was really about. But anyway, he said the initiative must, quotes, follow the principle of wide consultation, joint contribution and shared benefit. He said it's his belief that Britain, lying at the western end of the Belt and Road, is a natural partner in this endeavour. Britain has for centuries been one of the strongest advocates of global open trading system, and so he wants to bring his free trade agreements to this thing. Now, this initiative has been operating for quite some time now without Britain's free trade agreements. I'm not quite sure what Britain can add to that. He said that China and the UK have a long and rich trading history. Indeed, the English first attempted to establish a trade route to China in the 16th century, although it took 4 decades to find one. I welcome the Belt and Road Initiative as an opportunity to strengthen these ties. Well, let's look at how the British media has been covering it. The world must unite like a flock of geese, says China's Xi Jinping. And the Guardian here, pretty negative to what's going on. They're saying that lots of people pretty unhappy with the agreement that's come out of it. As Xi's conference entered its final day, they say those concerns burst out into the open, with Germany's representative warning that her country would refuse to sign a trade agreement marking the end of the summit unless it contained guarantees about allowing free tenders for Belt and Road projects. Other EU members, including Britain, France, Estonia, Greece and Portugal, were also refusing to support the document. Let's just remind ourselves of what China has actually done. 4.65 million new jobs in Q1 of this year, 220,000 higher than the same period last year. Of course, as we said, even Hammond had to announce acknowledge Chinese economic growth well beyond what anything in the West is capable of doing. They have created more than 11 million jobs in the past year, and 13.14 million jobs in total in 2016. So it is interesting to note that with all these jobs and the number of people lifted out of poverty, that the last time China was at a Sustainable Development Goals conference for the United Nations, they were making the point, of course, that they did all this. They lifted all these people out of poverty without fulfilling any of the Sustainable Development Goals targets. So it is a bit ironic, perhaps, as far as the United Nations is concerned. I think that if you look at some of the projects that are being implemented through this, some of them are absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and it shows it can be done by the use of national credit.
Absolutely.
Whereas at the moment we have the Labour Party refusing to discuss the Bradbury Pound, even though Mr Corbyn himself signed the early day motion saying he thought it was a good idea. Remarkable turnaround for some reason. Well, let's come in to UK and what's happening underneath the surface. Now, this gets us into an area where many people will instantly feel uncomfortable. But we'll follow this through. The Guardian here, a headline: I have little interest in sex, yet would like a partner, either a man or a woman. This is the person who's the centrepiece of this Guardian article. And they get some advice given by Pamela Stephenson Connolly. This is the comedian Connolly's wife. But as you begin to meet others, male and female, who are also interested in partnerships, you will learn more about yourself, including your true sexual orientation. So we're starting to push the message again that people don't know what sexuality they are. They can sort of be born and then explore it. And they may be surprised that they're male, female, something in between, or none of the above. Well, this is two of the organisations that this lady's connected with: the Society for the Scientific Study of Sexuality and the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. So transgender coming in there as the newspeak. Well, where does this policy take us? Well, we're getting really some quite direct clues now. Here's the Telegraph. Skirts for boys at private Highgate school under plans for, quote, gender neutral uniform. We've labelled this government attack on children's minds because, of course, this is not just happening in private schools. This is happening now in public schools. But in this particular case, the school already allows children to request that staff address them by a name of the opposite gender, which around half a dozen have done. I would imagine there's some of them who do that for the sheer fun value of it, but there we are. One boy has also been allowed to wear a dress to school. Adam Pettit, the headmaster at the school, told the Times this generation is really questioning if we're being binary in the way we look at things. So all of the language being thrown into this, and of course, what's the real agenda here? To totally confuse young people that they don't know what sex they are. They're confused as to their identity. And this is the part of the article that talks about state schools. Last year it was revealed that around 80 state schools were allowing pupils to wear clothes of the opposite gender.
So that's Highgate School, just not 5 minutes walk away from Hampstead.
Indeed it is, yeah. So we did what we always do, which is just to dig that little bit deeper into the story to see what we find. And the first place we went to is Highgate School itself. So let's bring on Highgate. Now you'll have to freeze the screen to have a look at this. But we just had time to have a look at two individuals. Let's bring in the first one here. We've got Bob Rothenberg. He's Treasurer and Chairman since 2017. He's a Senior Partner at Blick Rothenberg, Chartered Accountants. He's got an MBE, New Year's Honours List for Services to Business and the Community. We noticed he's a trustee of Police Now, and we're going to come on to that. The other man there we looked at was fascinating because John Mills, retired in 2007 after a public service career, 5 years in the government of Hong Kong, part of the Prime Minister's policy unit, also Office of Fair Trading and a Director of Rural Policy at DEFRA. And of course, remember that DEFRA was one of the key departments which figures in the government's behavioural change programme. So two interesting governors on this remarkable school where the boys are going to be called girls' names, going to wear skirts, and the girls are going to mix it the other way. No protests, so we can be assured that these governors are fully in agreement with this aggressive cross-gender, transgender policy. So let's have a little look at the gentleman himself. Here's Bob, if we can just pop him on screen. And this is from Police Now website. So it talks about Blick Rothenberg again. He's a board member of was a board member of Think London for 11 years, and he's advised many UK companies. Chairman of Global Accounting Association, BKR, and he's regularly quoted on tax and commercial issues and has appeared on radio and television. Well, who would we expect to see alongside him in this interesting organisation? Well, now we can get in some pretty serious people because we've got Claire Davies, the Director of HR Metropolitan Police Services. So here we are, responsible for the whole of the Met Police. Presumably she's implicated in the John Wedger affair, because if she's Director of Human Resources, presumably she's the lady who should be protecting John Wedger now that he's got official whistleblower statement.
Instead of cutting his salary, you mean? Instead
of cutting his salary, indeed, yeah. So that's an interesting combination. What does Police Now do? Well, it's this. Police Now exists to transform communities, reduce crime, and increase the public's confidence in policing by recruiting and developing an outstanding and diverse group of individuals to be leaders on the policing front line and in wider society.
So it's common purpose for the police then?
Thank you. Based on the models of Teach First, primary and secondary schools, Think Ahead, adult social care and frontline, children's social work, Police Now is, quote, a social enterprise that promotes public service in some of the UK's most challenged areas, among high achieving graduates. So we've now got a police training organisation which is really totally unaccountable to the public, but this is all based on leadership, and we can now see that one of their key men thinks that women should be dressing as men, boys should be dressing as girls. Perhaps this policy is now being introduced into police training, Mike.
Yes, isn't it interesting that a policing organisation reducing crime is only secondary?
Yes.
Transforming communities is primary?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
It is. The whole thing's very interesting. We've only had a little bit of time to go into this, so we'll jump back to the people because I encourage people to go and have a look at this. We've got James Darley. Why are we interested in him? Well, he's an ex-Credit Suisse European head of graduate recruitment man, and he's also an ex-Deutsche Bank fixed income graduate recruitment. So we've now got people who are clearly bankers working directly alongside, well, the head of our counter-terrorism policing. So this is a remarkable combination of people. Helen Ball here, Deputy Assistant Commissioner, was appointed Senior National Coordinator for Counter-Terrorism Policing in August 2013. So banks alongside senior police officers in a vehicle where they are totally unaccountable.
What could possibly go wrong?
Well, I think what we're seeing here, Mike, is this is absolute big society communitarianism. So we watched the pantomime of Theresa May with her chains saying she's going to make people's life in employment easier. She's saying that we're coming out of Europe. Of course, this is a complete pack of lies. What is going on behind the scenes is the country is now being governed by these unaccountable bankers who are directly working with privatised public services. So we'd encourage people to go and have a look at these articles. We followed through a story about children being told they don't really know what sex they are. But of course, what we're interested in are the people who are telling the children this, and where those people are also having other influence on government policy. So that police organisation, Police Now, well worth a look. And we'll just pop in this one as a start of some local Plymouth stories. Just fascinating. The Plymouth Herald getting very exciting that a group of really bankers are now saying that they can make up to £200 million worth of loans available so that people can unlock equity in their homes, and the loans that are created are redeemed on the loanee's death. So what we're seeing here are banks sucking out wealth from families instead of the family's home being left to children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren. The banks are now going to get in there. People need the money. They're going to put in these advance loans. But this is advertised by the Plymouth Herald as though this is a bona fide company taking raw materials and creating proper wealth. Just quite remarkable. And I'd like to add to this, excuse me, that in Plymouth, as in other parts of the country, we can see social services quickly moving in alongside people who are in residential homes or care homes. Charges put on their property to pay for the costs of care. And then, of course, it's social services and the local council that take away people's property and savings. So a double attack, which is really an attack on children's future.
Well, let's go to The Independent then, who are saying how UK councils are crowdfunding themselves out of a crisis, because we have to promote the notion that local councils and county councils are in a financial crisis at the moment. And they're using Plymouth as the example of this. They say the building on the corner of Union Street in Plymouth had been empty since the mid-1980s, when one year at their annual street party, residents decided to do something about it. It was one of several boarded up properties in Stonehouse, one of the 1% most deprived areas in the country, and one of the only places in Plymouth with a licensed sex trade. Led by Stonehouse Action, a community group, residents hatched plans to transform the derelict building into a permanent space that embodied the spirit of the street party all year round. Now, I know some of the people that are involved in Stonehouse action. They're good people. They're trying to do their best. The point here is not to criticise them in any way, but to criticise the fact that Plymouth Council, according to this article, was the first in the country to partner with crowdfunder.co.uk in order to raise money for projects, including big society-style projects, and they say that they invested £60,000 from its community infrastructure levy, and they then used that to crowdfund £430,000 more for more than 100 projects in the city, from True Vision, Virtual Reality for Architecture, the Collins Park Trust, and a community garden. Well, that's all very interesting, but it is there to promote the notion that councils are short of cash. I just want to remind everybody of this article published almost 2 years ago now on the UK Column website, the Section 151 Officer, Council Tax and Fraudulent Accounting, written by John Hurst. And he makes the point that, of course, councils are not acknowledging the amount of money that they have. Their accounts are misleading, shall we say. And in his case, he was pointing out Powis Council, which is his local council, that they had usable reserves of £56 million and what they were describing as unusable reserves of £250 million. And I can tell you that whenever in the post-mortem following the Icelandic banking scandal, when so many British councils lost money as a result, I did a whole bunch of freedom of information requests to just about every council in the country, asking them about how much money they'd lost as a result of Icelandic banking. And many of the responses I got included this business of usable and unusable reserves. Powis Council is not unusual in having, the likes of £250 million in so-called unusable reserves. Why are these unusable, Brian?
Well, they will say that some of the reserves are not liquid reserves, that they're in property, but of course this is part of the spin, because when you ask for clear accounts to show exactly what is what, you invariably don't get them. And the other thing I will add, of course, is what we've consistently seen across the country is that where grant money has come into cities, whether it's been Plymouth or Glasgow, Sheffield, Newcastle, that grant money carved up into little pots, put in different accounts, so that ultimately the public denied one single audit trail of where the money has been spent. And we particularly saw that in Plymouth when the government had awarded some 49 million of New Deal money, which was supposed to be for community regeneration. No proper detailed audited accounts were ever put in front of the public. And the same process with 320 million of Objective 1 funding in Cornwall, simply frittered away, and no proper audit trail.
Right, I'm going to highlight this article from the Law Society Gazette and ask people for opinions on it. This headline here is "Erosion of Privilege Lambasted by Law Society." This is a row over a company called Eurasian Natural Resources Corporation. It's a mining company, and it was under investigation by the Serious Fraud Office. And the Serious Fraud Office was attempting to obtain internal documents which were held by the lawyers for Eurasian Natural Resources Corporation. This eventually went to court, and the High Court decided that the Serious Fraud Office should be given access to documents held by the company's lawyers. The company, of course, is denying any wrongdoing. You could say that under the law, under the rule of law, you're innocent until proven guilty, but nonetheless, SFO decided they wanted these documents. It went to court, and the court decided that the documents were not covered by professional legal privilege. So the solicitor, the law firm acting on behalf of the company, were not entitled to withhold these documents under legal privilege. And that the High Court has now decided that privilege applies only if the client anticipates actual criminal prosecution, and it can only protect documents which are being prepared with the sole or dominant purpose of conducting litigation. So I don't particularly like the Law Society, and particularly, especially don't like the Serious Fraud Office. But I'm interested to get opinions on what people think about this, because should all documents, should all communications between a client and their solicitor be sort of protected under privilege, or should they not? I'm not sure what the legal position is. The Law Society clearly feels that this is inappropriate legally, and the company involved is going to appeal this and back to the High Court again. But I'm just interested to see what people think about that.
So we would welcome comments and opinion from viewers and listeners on this one, because you can see two sides to this argument. Innocent till proven guilty, and therefore, if in the lead up to the court case you're having a dialogue with your solicitor or barrister, should that remain confidential? Or is it right to say that if there's sufficient evidence to show that guilt is there, this stuff should become public? I think it's the start of a slippery slope. I can't quite see where it goes, but I think I've got an idea that this is not good for justice. Well, we'll end on that note, as it's 13:50 at the moment. We'll say thank you very much for joining us. Remember, no UK column on Friday coming, or the following Monday, but we will be back tomorrow at the same time, 1 o'clock. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.